As I explore different ways to grow food and talk about all of the things that I've learned and all of the various issues that I've run up against, I often end up using the word context. I usually do this as an attempt to call attention to the particulars of a local climate, the soil conditions, cultural norms, local knowledge, and resource availability, and how they might all impact the success of different approaches in different places, or at least provide insight into why things worked or didn't work. For me, as a designer, context is also a call to explore and better understand the place that we are trying to engage with, while recognizing that context is always changing and we may need to anticipate that change. I usually describe the purpose of my explorations in the gardens and this YouTube channel as simply trying to help more people grow more of their own food, which I use as a broad and inclusive description that doesn't presuppose the many different reasons why people would want to grow their own food in the first place. But for me, there is a much larger context here that I've been thinking about a lot over the years. And more recently, I've begun to explore the question of how many more people and how much more food are we actually talking about. I think our food systems need to change for many reasons, including climate change, environmental destruction, biodiversity loss, resource use, waste, supply chain disruptions, exploitation, and economic stresses. There are many areas to focus on within our food systems, but for the most part, I focus mainly on vegetables, as that is where I have most interest and experience. I work on the assumption that a lot more of the vegetables that we eat need to be produced as an integrated part of our communities, and that we need to shift what we eat towards a more plant-based diet, and that this should be recognized as a massive transformation that needs to happen quickly. Or put more simply, we need to quickly change things so that most of us eat a lot more vegetables, with as much as possible being produced locally. Of course, this isn't always the case, and there are many exceptions, but I think it is a useful approach for many places, including within the context of Ireland, where I am based. And while the year 2050 might be a useful timescale to work within, I think that there are compelling reasons why things need to change much more quickly, and perhaps the more radical target of 2030 is a more appropriate, even if will be a lot harder to hit. In all of this, there are serious issues related to land, resources, markets, training, funding, policy, and legislation that will need to be sorted out. But I'm more interested in the people, on focusing on who is going to be doing the actual growing and at what scale they will be working at. I've been thinking about what this kind of change would really look like, and I've started to put numbers on all of this, to develop a simplistic model of possible future food production as a way of understanding the scope of the change that we could be looking at and how far away from the target we might be. I generally break down the food supply systems into three different sectors or scales of production. Large-scale producers growing typically monocropped vegetables for the mass market, medium-scale mixed production, generally for direct sale in local markets, and smaller scale with people growing vegetables mainly for their own use. At the moment, in Ireland and in many other places in the world, the vast majority of the food that we eat comes from the large scale, either grown in Ireland or imported, with very small amounts coming from the other two more local scales of production. And the big questions for me are how much of an increase can we expect from these currently tiny components of the food supply system, and how quickly, and what scale of a shift will be enough to meet the greenhouse gas emissions targets, or to hold biodiversity loss, or allow us to develop resilient food security locally, nationally, and globally. I don't really have an answer to these questions, but I find that it is useful to go through a simplistic scenario to see what things might look like. And for a while, I felt that we need to reduce the amount of food coming into from large-scale systems by at least half, and to build up the two more local scales of production to fill in that gap, as well as providing for any increase in vegetables that we do consume. The island of Ireland currently has a population of about 6.8 million people, including the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And apparently the average consumption of vegetables is currently about 100 kilograms per capita per year, not counting potatoes. This would translate to almost 700,000 tons of vegetables consumed each year, almost all of it from large-scale production systems. But if we want to see a dramatic shift towards people eating a lot more vegetables, I think we could easily double that to something like 200 kilograms per capita per year, which would push the total amount of needed to over 1.3 million tons of vegetables. And we need to take into account the likely increase in population that would slightly increase the total amount of vegetables that we would need to produce by 2030 and a bit more by 2050. In the scenario of trying to reduce the amount of vegetables that we get from large-scale systems by at least half, down to about 350,000 tons, then the medium and small-scale sectors would need to supply the remaining 1.1 million tons of vegetables that would be needed by 2030. For the sake of this simple exercise, I would split the amount of vegetables roughly between the medium and small-scale sectors. But regardless of how it is split, this is a massive task, and would require a huge number of people to start growing vegetables as professional growers and simply growing for themselves. Starting with the scale of growing that I'm most familiar with, I found that in the family scale gardens that I manage, I can generally produce about 500 kilograms or half a ton of vegetables each year from each of the gardens, not including potatoes. This is a fair amount of vegetables and a reasonable amount of work, but I think achievable for a lot of people who focus on growing food for themselves. Given that the average household size is about 2.75 people, 500 kilograms is not far off supplying the 200 kilograms per person that an average household would need, or good enough for the purposes of this back of the seed packet kind of calculation at least. If we want to get to the point where 35 to 40% of the total supply of vegetables was produced by people for their own consumption, then this could be seen as comparable to about 35 to 40% of all the households producing all of their vegetables in a large back garden or really productive allotment or some other growing space. This translates to more than 1 million avid vegetable growers on the island of Ireland, or about 15% of the total population, and I doubt it is currently even 1%. If the challenge was to get this many people growing substantial amounts of their own vegetables by 2030, then this means that on average more than 120,000 people would need to make a serious start on that journey each year. Actually, given that so many people seem to struggle with growing food and eventually give up, and it usually takes a number of years for others to skill up and get a garden grow to be reasonably productive, and that a certain amount of those who are successful will end up stopping at some point along the way due to life changes, a lot more need to start each year. So it seems to me that we need to see in the region of 150,000 people start a garden each year, or perhaps we could reduce that to about 50,000 people if we felt that we could extend the target date to the year 2050, and a lot of them would need to be really productive quite quickly. While there has been a dramatic increase in the number of people growing food in this past year, I don't know if it's been anywhere near that number. And I wonder what will have to change in order to enable this to happen year after year until the target is reached. But these numbers are too big to really get a handle on, and I find it useful to bring this kind of analysis down to a scale that is easier to understand and into a context that I'm more familiar with. The small village that I live in is likely to have a population of 1,000 people, or about 360 households, by the year 2030, assuming that household sizes remain similar to the national average, and the recent high rates of population growth in our community continue. So a population of this size and a shift in our diets to eating more vegetables, which quite a few of us have already done, would mean that about 150 tons of vegetables would be needed to be supplied within and around our community. And based on previous back of the seed packet calculations, we would want to see about 150 avid vegetable growers providing all of the vegetables for 35 to 40% of the households, collectively producing a total of about 75 tons of vegetables each year. We have definitely had a head start on this compared to other communities, but we are still a very long way off, as there are probably less than 5% of the households growing anywhere close to that scale at the moment. If we want to reach the target of 2030 in 9 years' time, then I would hope to see an average of at least 15 to 20 additional households each year in my small community make a realistic start in trying to grow a lot of their own food, but I don't see this happening yet. And if we think we can wait until 2050 to reach this target, and assuming that the recent population growth rates continue until then, we would still want to see at least 10 new substantial vegetable gardens started each year. There are a lot of people in my community who are eager to eat fresh, locally produced vegetables. And one of the main reasons why a lot of them aren't growing their own vegetables is because we already have decent supplies from other producers. We have a community farm, which, together with the surplus vegetables that I grow as part of this Red Gardens project, I would estimate we produce a total of about 20 tons of vegetables for the local community each year. This is a decent start towards producing the target of 75 tons of vegetables a year that this medium-scale sector would need to supply by the year 2030. But I don't think that the Red Gardens and the community farm would be able to produce enough to meet this target, even if both enterprises increased and maintained production quite significantly over the next 9 years. We are definitely going to need some more dedicated growers and enterprises working to supply our local community, especially as the population continues to grow by 2050. And 30 years from now, I seriously doubt I will still be growing at anywhere near the scale that would be needed, so someone will have to step in to fill that gap as well. The number of professional or dedicated vegetable growers that we will need in the future depends on how much each of them can manage or can produce using methods that are appropriate to that future context, which at the very least would be biodiversity friendly, with low greenhouse gas emissions, and broadly resilient. Another way to look at this is to determine what ratio of resident to grower is appropriate in terms of the amount and diversity of supply, as well as financial viability. Could one dedicated full-time grower produce 20 tons of a diverse range of vegetables, which would be enough to feed 100 residents for the year, assuming that the winter and seasonal shortages could be managed with storage and preserves? And could these 100 residents afford to pay enough to cover the costs and for the grower to have a livable wage? I don't know the answer to this, but 100 to 1 seems like a reasonable place to start. Or at least it's a nice round number to work with, though I suspect it would require a fair amount of skill and experience and quite a few years to get established. So, in this possible scenario, with these basic figures and a back of the seed packet kind of calculation, and a target of the year 2030, a community like ours with an anticipated population of 1,000 people would likely need about 4 full-time skilled vegetable growers to supply 35 to 40% of the vegetables consumed, and about 150 of the households would also have a large and productive gardens or allotments producing another 35 to 40% of the vegetables consumed. And we would have about 9 years to get to that point. And I think that all of this is something that we need to plan for in our community, or at least try to facilitate. There are a lot of different options that could be included in the mix, including school and community gardens and collaborative farming, but it will still take a lot of people getting directly involved. With this scenario, we would still be importing 50 tons of vegetables into our community each year, almost as much as we currently do, and I'm not sure if that's enough of a change to meet the challenges ahead. Of course, there is a lot that can be done to improve the large-scale vegetable production and distribution systems, and we need to make radical changes to so many aspects of this method that we currently rely on to feed so many people. But I believe that the closer we can get to producing the vast majority of our vegetables locally within our own community, the better. The same could be said of so many other places, and this simple exercise could be extrapolated to other communities, to the full island, and to different places around the world. But of course, there will be much more complex issues to deal with in many other places, especially in cities. There are huge possibilities with urban and peri-urban agriculture and a lot of open spaces in and around a lot of cities, but it will be a lot harder to achieve this kind of transformation of our food systems in an urban environment, which I think actually places greater responsibility on smaller communities like ours to radically relocalize whatever parts of the food supply system we can, to go farther and faster with the transition than would be possible in urban environments, or in many other places that don't have such good conditions for growing vegetables. Looking again at the full island of Ireland, which is perhaps better placed for this kind of transformation than many other locations around the world, this simple scenario would require 1 million avid growers producing lots of vegetables, mainly for their own households. And we would also need between 25,000 and 30,000 new dedicated full-time vegetable growers, assuming that the 100 to 1 ratio between consumers and growers is a viable and appropriate proportion. While there is a huge amount that would need to be done to provide access to land, funding, resources, training, and markets, and all of these are essential parts of the process, I keep coming back to the fact that all of this requires a lot more people doing the hard work and getting their hands dirty, quite literally. If we want to hit the target of the year 2030, then we would need to see at least 120,000 people starting to grow serious amounts of food for themselves each year, and at least 3,000 vegetable growing operations or market gardens starting up each year, and hope that most of them are highly successful. If we think we could extend the period of transition to the year 2050, then we might only need 40,000 new large vegetable plots or back gardens and allotments each year, and 1,000 new professional growers each year, but even that seems way more than is possible at the moment. Most of the time, I simply focus on a more bottom-up view of things, to engage with people who are already growing food for themselves, and with a belief that each person who is able to grow a little bit more of their own food is a success story. And this can be a really wonderful and encouraging space to be in, to share in the collective learning process with so many people around the world and right here in my own community. But I also think it's important to occasionally step back and to take a more top-down view, a general overview of the whole system, and to try to figure out how far along we are in this global, national, and local transformation that is both massive and urgent. And that overview can be really demoralizing. But I also think that it's essential to have a better understanding of that larger context, even if our own contributions seem incredibly tiny in comparison. Personally, I try to find a balance between being delighted with all the things we've been able to do so far, excited about the possibilities of the next growing season, and frustrated or worried that it's not enough yet. And I do struggle with that balance sometimes. But I keep going, knowing that my job is to grow more food and to help more people grow more of their own food, because I think that the world desperately needs a lot more of us.